Have you ever wondered what happens when the person you trampled on for years, the one you made a fool of, suddenly rises up and becomes everything you never imagined? Well, I lived it. And the story is much crazier than you can imagine. My name is Maya, and for a long time, my life was a private hell. No, I'm not exaggerating. For as long as I can remember, I was the gang's favorite target. You know that kid who's always in the corner, with books in hand, avoiding noise and rough play? That was me. I grew up in a small town in the heart of Texas, where American football and hunting were the biggest passions. I, on the other hand, was fascinated by computers, books, and anything that would take me out of that monotonous and, to be honest, cruel reality. My family was neither rich nor poor. We were what they called working class, but to my classmates' eyes, that didn't matter. I was the weirdo, the nerd, the weakling. And they made sure to remind me of it every day. The leader of the pack was a guy named Jake. He was tall, strong, the school's football quarterback, and had a smile that might be charming to girls. But to me, it was the personification of evil. Jake and his cronies, Mark, the brainless brute, and Sarah, the queen of gossip and manipulation, were my daily tormentors. I remember one day, in elementary school, when I was reading a book about astronomy during recess. Jake approached, snatched the book from my hands, and threw it into the nearest mud puddle. "Look at the nerd studying the stars," he sneered, and everyone laughed. I felt my face burn with shame and anger, but I said nothing. What could I do? I was small, Finn, and there were many. I swallowed my tears and humiliation, as I always did. This scene repeated itself in various forms over the years. My backpack was thrown in the trash, my school assignments were torn, I was pushed in the hallways, and jokes about my intelligence and my clumsiness at sports were constant. They isolated me. In the cafeteria, I always ate alone. For group projects, no. One wanted to be with me. Parties? I was never invited. I was invisible to most, and a target for the few who bothered to torment me. I dreamed of escaping that town, those people, that life. Every day was a battle to simply exist without being crushed. But the humiliation, however painful, was teaching me something. It gave me a silent motivation, a flame that burned within me, pushing me to be more, to go further. I didn't know how, but I knew that one day things would be different. I promised myself that. And that promise was the only thing that kept me going during those dark years. With every laugh, every shove, every time I was left out, I stored it away. Not to get petty revenge, but to propel myself forward. To prove to myself, and perhaps to them, that I was more than the pathetic image they painted. I was Maya, and I had a plan. A plan that no one, not even I, knew exactly what it was, but that was forming silently in the depths of my mind. High school was even worse, if that was even possible. The bullying became more sophisticated, more cruel. It wasn't just shoves and books thrown in the mud anymore. Now, it was anonymous messages on social media, humiliatingly altered photos of me circulating in WhatsApp groups, and malicious whispers that followed me everywhere. It was constant psychological torture, and I felt increasingly cornered. I remember a specific incident in my sophomore year of high school. It was the day of the junior prom. I never cared much about those things, but my mum, always optimistic, insisted I go and even helped me choose a simple but pretty dress. I was nervous, but there was a small spark of hope that maybe for one night I could just be a normal girl. How naive of me. As soon as I arrived at the school gym, decorated for the prom, I felt the stares. Jake and his group were there. Of course, Sarah, in her expensive dress and a superior smile, spotted me first. She whispered something to Jake, who immediately turned to me. My heart froze. I tried to ignore it, to find a corner, but it was too late. Suddenly the music stopped. The DJ, a friend of Jake's, announced into the microphone, "We have a special guest tonight. Our very own Maya, the prom queen." A spotlight lit up and followed me, exposing me to everyone. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. Jake approached, holding a bucket. Before I could react, he dumped the bucket over my head. It wasn't water. It was a sticky, foul-smelling liquid, a mixture of molasses and pillow feathers. The laughter was deafening. Everyone laughed. Some took pictures with their cell phones. I stood there, dripping, with feathers stuck in my hair and dress, smelling the sweet, sickening odor of humiliation. My mom had told me I looked like a princess. At that moment, I looked like a monster from a horror movie. Tears came, hot and uncontrollable, mixing with the molasses. I ran out without looking back, hearing the laughter echo behind me. I got home, collapsed on my bedroom floor, and cried until I had no more tears. That night, I promised myself that I would never be the victim again. Never again. Something changed inside me. The pain transformed into a cold determination. I didn't just want to escape. I wanted to prosper. I wanted them to see what they had lost, what they had tried to destroy. I decided that my escape wouldn't be physical, at least. Not immediately. It would be intellectual. I dove headfirst into my studies, especially programming and computer science. I spent sleepless nights learning, coding, solving complex problems. The internet became my sanctuary, a place where I could be whoever I wanted, without judgment. I connected with online communities of nerds and programmers, and discovered I wasn't alone. There was a whole world of people like me, who valued intelligence and creativity. While my classmates worried about parties and games, I was building my future, line by line of code. I knew that knowledge was power, and I was secretly accumulating that power. Every algorithm I mastered, every project I completed, was a small step away from that hell, and a step towards the Maya I wanted to be. The humiliated girl was dying, and a new, stronger, more determined version was being born. The following years were a blur of code, books, and voluntary isolation. I became a learning machine. While my classmates prepared for senior prom or weekend parties, I was immersed in Python, JavaScript, and C++ tutorials. I learned about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and even started dabbling in blockchain, which at the time was still a niche concept. I wasn't just studying, I was building. Small projects, some simple apps, basic websites. Every line of code was a brick in my personal fortress. My passion for technology wasn't just an escape. It was a form of power. I saw the world changing rapidly, and I knew the future belonged to those who understood and could shape this new digital universe. I didn't just want to be a part of it. I wanted to be a force within it. The smell of molasses and feathers still haunted me sometimes, but now, instead of paralyzing me, it propelled me forward. It was a constant reminder of what I would never allow to happen again. In my senior year of high school, while everyone worried about traditional universities and sports scholarships, I had a different plan. I didn't want to go to a large college where I'd just be another number, or worse, where the cycle of bullying could repeat. I wanted a place where my intelligence was valued above all else. I researched tirelessly and found a cutting-edge technological university with an elite computer science program that valued practical projects and innovation. It was hard to get into, extremely competitive, but I was determined. I applied, sent in my portfolio of projects, which, for a high school girl, was impressive, and prepared for the interviews. I remember the surprise on my teachers' faces when I told them which university I was applying to. They knew me as the quiet student, not as the tech genius. But they didn't know what I was doing on my nights and weekends. When the acceptance letter arrived, I didn't scream or jump for joy. I just felt a deep calm, a silent satisfaction. It was the first concrete step out of that town and that life. I had done it. Without anyone's help, just with my own willpower and the fire that humiliation ignited in me. The news spread quickly at school. Jake, Sarah, and Mark, who were preparing to go to mediocre state colleges, were shocked. They couldn't understand how the nerd they tormented had achieved something so big. Their gazes were now a mixture of disbelief and, perhaps, a little envy. But I didn't care. I was finally free. On graduation day, while everyone hugged and promised to keep in touch, I said goodbye to that town without a single tear. For me, it was the end of a nightmare and the beginning of a dream. I was heading to Silicon Valley, the epicenter of technology, the place where I truly belonged. I was ready for the next chapter, unaware that destiny still held an even bigger twist, one that would bring me back to those who once made me cry. Arriving in Silicon Valley was like breathing for the first time. After years underwater, the air was different, charged with innovation, ambition, and an energy I had never felt. The university was a melting pot of brilliant minds, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the weirdo. I was just one among many who lived and breathed technology. It was my place. I dove headfirst into my studies. The sleepless nights in high school had given me a solid foundation, and I absorbed every new piece of information like a sponge. I excelled in classes, participated in hackathons, and started networking with professors and other students. I was no longer the shy, isolated Maya. I was flourishing, becoming the person I always knew I could be. Far from the stares and judgments of my hometown. My university projects were ambitious. I specialized in artificial intelligence and machine learning, areas that fascinated me with their ability to transform the world. I spent hours on end in labs, developing complex algorithms and building prototypes. I remember one particular project, an AI system that optimized supply chains, which caught the attention of some professors and even angel investors. It was the first time I tasted recognition, and it was addictive. During the summers, instead of going home, I interned at promising startups. I worked in dynamic environments, learned from the best, and saw firsthand how ideas transformed into products that impacted millions of people. Each experience made me more confident, more experienced, and more connected. I was building my reputation, brick by brick, in the real world. Still, the scars of the past didn't completely disappear. Sometimes, in quiet moments, the smell of molasses would return, or I'd find myself reliving the prom scene. But now, those memories didn't paralyze me. They reminded me where I came from and gave me even more strength to go where I wanted to go. I knew that true revenge wasn't retaliation, but success, and I was on the right path to achieving it. After graduating with honors, I received several job offers from major tech companies. But I had a different vision. I wanted to build something of my own, something that not only solved a problem, but also had a significant impact. I wanted to create a company that would be a beacon of innovation and in some way could show the world the power of technology for good. With the help of some university colleagues and investment from one of the professors who believed in my AI project, I founded Nexus AI. Our initial goal was to develop artificial intelligence solutions for process optimization in large corporations. It was a competitive market, but I was confident. We had a brilliant team and cutting-edge technology. The first few months were a whirlwind of work, sleepless nights, and constant challenges. But every obstacle overcome was a victory. We were growing and fast. And I, the humiliated nerd, was the CEO. Nexus AI took off faster than I could have imagined. Our supply chain optimization system was revolutionary. It used AI algorithms to predict demands, manage inventories, and route deliveries with an efficiency that companies had never seen before. Large corporations started knocking on our door. Word of mouth spread, and investors who were once curious were now begging to put money into our company. I became a public figure in the tech world. My conference talks were always packed, and I was frequently quoted in magazine articles and specialized portals. The nerd, who was once thrown in the mud, was now on stage, dictating trends and inspiring others. It was surreal. I'd catch myself thinking, are they seeing this? Do Jake, Sarah, and Mark know who I've become? The truth is, deep down, I didn't care as much about what they thought, but rather about the validation that all my effort had been worth it. Life in Silicon Valley was intense. I worked 12, 14 hours a day, sometimes more, but I loved every minute of it. I was building something significant, creating jobs and solving real problems for giant companies. My team was incredible, a group of talented and passionate people who shared my vision. They saw me as a leader, a visionary, and that trust propelled me even further. With success came the perks. I moved into a modern house overlooking the bay, bought my dream car. A Tesla, of course, because I'm a tech enthusiast, and started traveling the world for business and, occasionally, for leisure. I was living the life I only dared to dream of when I was 16-year-old Maya, covered in molasses and feathers. But despite all the glitter and success, I never forgot where I came from. The memory of the prom, the shoves, the laughter was an intrinsic part of my story. It wasn't something I wanted to erase, but rather something that reminded me of my resilience. It was my battle scar, a constant reminder that pain can be a powerful driving force. One day, I received an invitation to be the keynote speaker at a tech conference in Austin, Texas. My heart skipped a beat. Austin wasn't my hometown, but it was close enough to bring back memories. I hesitated for a moment. I had avoided any contact with Texas for years. But then I thought, why not? I'm not that girl anymore. It was an opportunity to showcase my success back home, without having to confront anyone directly. Or so I thought. I accepted the invitation. The conference would be huge, with industry leaders and cutting-edge innovations. I would present a new module of Nexus AI that promised to revolutionize global logistics. It was a big moment for the company, and for me. Little did I know that this trip back to Texas would be the catalyst for the twist I had been waiting for, and that would bring me face to face with my past in a way I never could have predicted. The trip to Austin was unlike any other business trip I had taken. There was a tension in the air, a mix of excitement and a pang of nervousness. It wasn't the nervousness of public speaking. I was already used to that. It was the nervousness of being back in Texas, of knowing that, somehow, the past could intersect with the present. I mentally prepared myself for it, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. The conference was huge, a 3-day event with thousands of attendees. My speech was scheduled for the second day on the main stage. The night before, I attended a networking dinner with other CEOs and investors. The atmosphere was vibrant, full of conversations about the future of technology. I was in my element, exchanging ideas and making valuable contacts. It was during that dinner that I saw her. Sarah. She was sitting at a table not far from mine, laughing loudly with a group of people. My heart pounded. She looked different, of course. Older, with an air of sophistication I had never seen in her at school. but the features were unmistakable. The same blonde hair, the same smile, though now it seemed a little forced. She didn't see me. I shrank a little, an automatic reflex from the old days, but quickly composed myself. I wasn't the old Maya anymore. The next day, the day of my speech, the tension increased. I rehearsed my presentation several times, focusing on every detail of Nexus AI's new module. I walked onto the stage with a confidence I had built over years. The audience was immense and camera flashes flickered incessantly. I began to speak, explaining the complexity of our technology in a way everyone could understand, and the impact it would have on the world. In the middle of my presentation, as I described the predictive capabilities of our AI system for logistics optimization, my eyes swept the audience. And that's when I saw them. Jake and Mark. They were sitting in the front rows, with expressions of shock and disbelief on their faces. Their eyes were wide, fixed on me. They recognized me. There was, no doubt, time seemed to stop. For an instant, the molasses and feathers from the prom came back to my mind. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was a mix of triumph and an overwhelming curiosity. What were they doing there? Why were they looking at me like that? I continued my speech, without missing a beat, but with a new energy. Every word, every slide, was a silent blow. I was there, on stage, under the spotlights, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, while they were in the audience, watching. The irony was palpable. At the end of the presentation, the audience erupted in applause. I answered a few questions, and then stepped off the stage, surrounded by journalists and admirers. But my eyes were fixed on Jake and Mark. They were standing up, trying to approach. It was at that moment that the first question of the story revealed itself, not to the audience, but to myself. How did they get to this point of desperation? I had no idea what was coming, but I knew that the answer to that question would be the key to the next phase of my story. I was surrounded by a crowd of people, all wanting to shake my hand, ask questions, or simply congratulate me. But my attention was divided. I could feel Jake and Mark's eyes following me as they tried to approach. It was like a scene from a movie, but it was my life. I took a deep breath, reminded myself who I was now, and prepared. I managed to break away from most people and headed to a more secluded area where my public relations team was waiting for me. That's when Jake and Mark finally caught up to me. They seemed hesitant, almost embarrassed. Jake, the once confident quarterback, seemed to have shrunk. Mark, the brute, seemed smaller. Maya, Jake began, his voice a little hoarse. He was visibly uncomfortable. Is that really you? I stared at him. There was no anger in my eyes, just a calm observation. Yes, Jake, it's me. Maya. Mark, who was beside him, cleared his throat. Wow, you've changed a lot, Maya. I mean, we saw you up on stage and it's impressive. I just nodded, waiting. They were clearly trying to process what they were seeing. The girl they used to humiliate was there, a successful woman in the spotlight. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice neutral, emotionless. Jake shifted. Well, we work for a logistics company. We came to the conference to see what's new. And, we saw your name in the program. We didn't believe it was you until we saw you on stage. A logistics company. The irony was so thick I could almost touch it. My company, Nexus AI, was revolutionizing the logistics sector. I see, I said. And how are things for you? They exchanged glances. It was Mark who answered, with a sigh. Not so good, to be honest, Maya. Our company is in trouble. Big trouble. We're losing contracts, clients. The competition is swallowing us whole, Jake added, his voice lower. We're on the verge of bankruptcy, Maya. That's why we came. We're looking for anything that can help us turn things around. New technologies, solutions, anything. The answer to my internal question, how did they get to this point of desperation, began to unfold before my eyes. They weren't there by chance. They were there because they were desperate. And destiny, with its peculiar sense of humor, had led them directly to my door. I, the person they had tried to destroy, was now the only one who might be able to save them. I felt a wave of emotions. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was a sense of power. Yes, but also a strange compassion. They looked so different from the arrogant boys I knew. Time and hardship had transformed them. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And to my own surprise, it was true. Nexus AI may have some solutions that could help, but it's not something we can discuss here and now. Jake and Mark lit up. You'd give us a chance? A meeting? Anything? The hope in their eyes was almost painful to see. I thought for a moment I could simply turn my back. I had every right to do so, but something held me back. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the need to see how far this story would go. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was a chance to close a cycle. In a way I never imagined possible. Send an email to my assistant, I said, handing them a Nexus AI business card. She'll schedule a meeting for you at our headquarters in Silicon Valley. But I don't promise anything. They took the card as if it were gold. Thank you so much. Maya, thank you very, very much. As they walked away, I felt a lump in my throat. The past was knocking at my door and I had just opened it. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew the story was about to take an even more surprising turn. The days following the conference in Austin were strange. I was back to my busy routine in Silicon Valley, but the image of Jake and Mark, so diminished and desperate, wouldn't leave my mind. My assistant Sarah, a different Sarah of course, and infinitely more competent, informed me that they had sent the email and were eager for the meeting. I scheduled it for the following week. On the morning of the meeting, I felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity. It wasn't anger that dominated me anymore, but a kind of expectation. I wanted to see what they would say, how they would behave. I wanted to understand the extent of their desperation. They arrived at Nexus AI headquarters promptly. Our headquarters is a modern building with glass walls, open spaces, and a vibrant atmosphere. The reception area is elegant, with interactive screens displaying our projects and achievements. I imagined their reaction to seeing all of that when I saw them in the waiting room. They seemed even more nervous than at the conference. Jake was wearing a suit that looked a little tight, and Mark, a wrinkled dress shirt. They were no longer the school bullies. They were just two middle-aged men, visibly worried. I greeted them with a professional smile, but without warmth. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. They sat down, looking around with a mix of admiration and discomfort. Wow, Maya, this place is impressive, Jake said, his voice a little choked. Thank you, I replied. So, tell me about your company's situation. What exactly is happening? They began to explain. Their company, Texas Logistics Solutions, was a family-owned trucking company that had been around for decades. But in recent years, they hadn't been able to adapt to new technologies. Their systems were old, their processes inefficient, and the competition, which had invested heavily in AI and automation, was crushing them. They had lost important contracts and banks were threatening to cut off credit. We're losing money every day, Maya, Mark said, his voice almost a whisper. We've tried everything. We've cut costs, laid off employees, but nothing seems to work. We need a miracle. Jake added, his voice lower. We're on the verge of bankruptcy. Maya, that's why we came. We're looking for anything that can help us turn things around. New technologies, solutions, anything. The answer to my internal question, how did they get to this point of desperation, began to unfold before my eyes. They weren't there by chance. They were there because they were desperate. And destiny, with its peculiar sense of humor, had led them directly to my door. I, the person they had tried to destroy, was now the only one who might be able to save them. I felt a wave of emotions. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was a sense of power. Yes, but also a strange compassion. They looked so different from the arrogant boys I knew. Time and hardship had transformed them. I understand your situation, I said, my voice still controlled. Nexus AI has the technology to revolutionize your operation. Our system can reduce costs, optimize routes, and drastically increase efficiency. But this would require a significant investment and a complete restructuring of how you operate. They brightened. Willing to do whatever it takes, Maya. Anything. I interrupted them. But before we discuss any proposal, there's something we need to address. The past. They froze. The room fell silent. This was the moment, the meeting. Room fell into a heavy silence. Jake and Mark cringed in their chairs, their faces pale. They knew exactly what past I was referring to. It was time to confront the elephant in the room, the molasses and feathers, the laughter, the years of torment. I know you know what I'm talking about, I began, my voice still calm, but with a firmness I never had as a teenager. The years of bullying, the humiliation, the isolation. I haven't forgotten. And, to be honest, I didn't expect you to be here today, asking for my help. Mark was the first to speak. His voice choked. Maya, we know we messed up. We messed up badly. There's no excuse for what we did. We were idiots, insecure, and we took it out on you because you were different. You were smart. And we were jealous. Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. He's right, Maya. I was a jerk. A complete jerk. I thought being the tough guy was what mattered. I made you suffer. And I deeply regret it. All these years I've thought about you, about how much you must hate us. And now, to be here, asking for your help. It's the biggest proof that what goes around comes around. They weren't trying to defend themselves. They weren't minimizing what they did. They were confessing, and the sincerity in their voices was palpable. It was an apology that came from a place of true pain and regret, not convenience. And Sarah? I asked, remembering the queen of gossip. Is she involved in your company too? Jake shook his head. No. Sarah. She married a rich guy and moved to California a few years ago. We don't have much contact with her. But she was there too, we know. I felt a lump in my throat. It was strange. I had spent years imagining this moment, dreaming of a confrontation where I would be in control. But now that it was happening, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. There was a sadness for what they had become, and a surprise at how destiny had brought them back into my life. I'm not apologizing to get the contract, Maya, Mark continued. I'm apologizing because it's the right thing to do, because the weight of what we did has haunted us for years. You didn't deserve that. No one does. Jake looked up and met my gaze. There were tears in his eyes. If you decide not to help us, I'll understand. You have every right. But I needed you to know that we regret it. Truly. Silence returned to the room. I watched them, two broken men, begging not just for a contract, but for some kind of redemption. That moment was more powerful than any revenge I could have imagined. It was proof that success, resilience, and the ability to forgive, or at least not retaliate, were the greatest weapons. I took a deep breath. I appreciate your honesty. It's not easy to admit mistakes, especially such serious ones. What you did marked me deeply and shaped the person I am today. But it also gave me the strength to get where I am. They looked at me with cautious hope. I still hadn't said whether I would help them or not. The silence in the room was almost deafening. Jake and Mark waited, holding their breath for my next word. I could see the anxiety in their eyes, the fragile hope they placed in me. It was a power I never imagined having over them, and it was strange. I felt no joy in seeing them like this. Just a complex mix of emotions. What you did was unforgivable at the time, I finally said, my voice a little softer but still serious. Those years were the hardest of my life. But as I said, it shaped me. It made me stronger, more determined. And it brought me here. I watched them for another moment, evaluating not just their words, but their body language. They seemed genuinely remorseful. Time and hardship had, indeed, taught them a lesson that school never could. Nexus AI is not a charity, I continued. We are a company that seeks strategic and profitable partnerships. And, to be frank, your situation is quite precarious. An investment in you would be a considerable risk for us. Their faces fell a little, but they didn't interrupt me. However, I added, and saw hope rekindle in their eyes, I believe in the potential of our technology. And in a way, I believe in people's ability to change. I won't forget the past, but I also won't let it stop me from doing what's right for my business, or from recognizing an opportunity, however unlikely it may seem. Jake and Mark leaned forward, eager. I'm willing to consider a partnership, I said, but under very specific terms. First, you'll have to undergo a complete audit by our financial and technical team. We need to thoroughly understand the health of your company and the feasibility of a restructuring. Second, if we decide to move forward, it will be a shared risk contract. Nexus AI will invest our technology and expertise, but you will have to commit fully to the changes we propose. They nodded vigorously. Anything, Maya. We're willing to do anything. And third, I said, looking directly at Jake, you'll have to understand that this isn't a matter of personal forgiveness, at least not yet. It's a business decision. My decision to help your company is based on the belief that we can turn it into something profitable for Nexus AI. The past is another story. They seem to understand. The line between personal and professional was thin, but I needed to make it clear that the business decision wasn't purely emotional. We understand, Maya, Jake said, his voice firmer now. And we're grateful for any consideration. My team will contact you to begin the audit, I concluded. Prepare all the documents and information you can. The more transparent you are, the better. They stood up, with a new gleam in their eyes. The hope, which was once a spark, now seemed like a flame. They thanked me profusely, and I escorted them out of the meeting room. As I watched Jake and Mark walk away down the hallway, a new question began to form in my mind. A question that would haunt me in the coming days. Have they truly changed? Deep down, or is necessity the only thing driving them? The answer to that question would be the real test. Not just for them, but for me too. The audit of Texas Logistics Solutions began the following week. I assigned an elite team from Nexus AI, our best financial analysts, software engineers, and logistics specialists, to dive into their data. I wanted a complete, unfiltered analysis to understand the true extent of the hole they were in. and, more importantly, to see if there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Jake and Mark were incredibly cooperative. They opened all their books, shared every report, and answered every question with a transparency I never would have expected from them. It was clear they were desperate, but they also seemed to have accepted the reality of the situation. There was no longer the arrogance of the past, just a humility that bordered on despair. My team worked tirelessly. They spent hours analyzing spreadsheets, workflow diagrams, and legacy systems. The initial reports were grim. The company was in a worse situation than I imagined. Accumulated debts, lost contracts, obsolete technology, and an internal culture that resisted change. It was a classic case of a company that failed to adapt to the new digital landscape. But, despite the challenges, there was a glimmer of hope. Texas Logistics Solutions still had a loyal, albeit small, customer base and a reputation for reliability that came from decades of service. The problem wasn't a lack of demand, but an inability to meet that demand efficiently and competitively. It was a problem that Nexus AI was perfectly equipped to solve. As the audit progressed, I found myself observing Jake and Mark during meetings. They were tense, but attentive, absorbing every word from my experts. They asked intelligent questions, showing that they were genuinely trying to understand what needed to be done. That was a side of them I had never seen in school. A serious, committed, and, in a way, vulnerable side. The question I had asked myself: have they truly changed deep down, or is necessity the only thing driving them? Kept echoing. In my mind, necessity was undoubtedly a great motivator, but the way they were behaving, the openness and apparent sincerity, suggested that perhaps there was something more. Perhaps despair had, in fact, broken down the old masks and revealed a more genuine side. One day, during a break in the audit, Jake approached me alone. "Maya," he said, his voice low, "I know you don't have to do this, and I know what we did was unforgivable, but I just wanted to tell you that no matter what happens with the company, I'm grateful you gave us this chance. You don't owe us anything." Mark joined us. "It's true, Maya. We haven't slept properly in months. Seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, even if it's small, means a lot to us. And to know that light comes from you, it's a humbling lesson we'll never forget." I looked at them. There was no longer the gleam of hope in their eyes, but rather a weary resignation. They were exhausted, and their vulnerability was palpable. At that moment, the line between the professional and the personal became even thinner. I wasn't just evaluating a company. I was evaluating the possibility of redemption, not just for them, but perhaps, in some way, for me too. The audit lasted over a week, and each day brought new revelations about the depth of Texas Logistics Solutions problems. My engineers and analysts worked tirelessly, and the reports that landed on my desk were detailed and, at times, alarming. Their company was truly on the brink. However, amidst all the discouraging numbers and charts, there was a positive point my team highlighted. Texas Logistics' physical infrastructure, though old, was robust. They had a well-maintained fleet of trucks and strategically located warehouses. The problem wasn't a lack of assets, but a lack of intelligence in managing those assets. It was a software problem, not a hardware one. And that, for Nexus AI, was an opportunity. I met with my leadership team to discuss the audit results. The room was filled with charts and projections. "The company is in a critical situation," my CFO, David, began. "The risk is high. They need a massive injection of technology and capital to survive." My head of operations, Emily, added, "But if we can implement our AI system, the optimization can be exponential. They have the physical foundation. We have the intelligence. It's a combination that, if it works, can generate impressive returns." the discussion was purely business. No one mentioned the past except myself in my thoughts. I was there, listening to the pros and cons, trying to separate emotion from logic. The question, have they truly changed deep down, or is necessity the only thing driving them, still bothered me. But at that moment, the question was whether Nexus AI should take this risk. After hours of debate, the team reached a cautious consensus. The profit potential was significant, but the risk was equally great. The final decision was mine. I spent the night awake. Memories of the prom, the molasses, the laughter, mingled with profit projection charts and risk analyzers. I could see Jake's desperate face, Mark's humility. It was a crossroads. I could simply say no, and Texas Logistics Solutions would likely go bankrupt. I wouldn't have to deal with my past, and Nexus AI would avoid a risk. Or I could take their chance and maybe, just maybe, transform not only a company, but also the lives of people who once tormented me. In the morning, I made my decision. I summoned Jake and Mark for a final meeting. They arrived, visibly nervous, with hope and fear etched on their faces. "We've received the audit reports," I began, my voice firm. "Your situation is serious, but Nexus AI is willing to partner with you." A sigh of relief escaped both of them. They exchanged glances, their eyes welling up. "However," I continued, "the terms will be strict. Nexus AI will not only implement our AI optimization technology, but also take a majority stake in Texas Logistics Solutions. You will remain as operations managers, but the strategic direction and major decisions will be ours. It will be an acquisition disguised as a partnership, with the condition that, if the company recovers and meets certain profitability targets, you will have the option to buy back a portion of the shares over time." They were in shock. It was a bold proposal, one that gave them a chance at salvation, but at the cost of much of their control. Jake was the first to recover. "Maya, it's more than we could ask for. We accept any terms. We just want to save the company. And the jobs." Mark nodded vigorously. "Yes, Maya, we accept. We're in your hands." I watched them. This was the moment. The power was completely inverted. The girl they used to humiliate was now in charge of their destinies. And the answer to my internal question about whether they had truly changed began to unfold in an unexpected way. The days following our final meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers from both sides worked tirelessly to formalize the agreement. Nexus AI was, in fact, acquiring a majority stake in Texas Logistics Solutions. It was a risky move for us, but Emily and David's team had convinced me that the potential for return was immense, provided that the AI implementation was successful, and that Jake and Mark fully cooperated. They cooperated. More than that, they threw themselves headfirst into the process. My team of engineers and data scientists temporarily moved to Texas, setting up in Texas Logistics offices. The initial culture shock between Silicon Valley and the old Texas guard was evident. But Jake and Mark acted as bridges, facilitating communication and ensuring everyone was aligned with the new vision. Watch them working side by side with my engineers, learning about the new systems, asking questions, and even suggesting some adaptations that made sense for the local reality. They were motivated, not just by the survival of their jobs, but by the chance to see the family company reborn. That glimmer of hope I had seen in their eyes in my meeting room now transformed into a fire of determination. Implementing Nexus AI system was a complex process. It involved digitizing all processes, integrating sensors into trucks for real-time monitoring, and creating a centralized control panel that allowed the logistics team to optimize routes, manage fuel consumption, and predict maintenance with unprecedented accuracy. It was a complete revolution for Texas logistics. The first results were impressive. In just a few months, Texas Logistics Solutions' operational efficiency soared. Fuel costs dropped drastically, deliveries became faster, and more punctual, and customer satisfaction increased. Old clients who had migrated to the competition began to return, attracted by the promise of superior service and more competitive prices. Jake and Mark were euphoric. They called me with progress reports almost daily, their voices full of enthusiasm. "Maya, you won't believe it. We just closed a contract with XYZ Corp, a client we lost years ago." Or, "Wow, Maya, the AI system predicted a truck failure before it even happened. That saved us thousands." The question, have they truly changed deep down, or is necessity the only thing driving them, still lingered. But with each victory for Texas Logistics, the answer seemed to lean more towards the former. They weren't just following orders. They were investing their energy and passion in the transformation. It was as if they had found a new purpose, a new way to be proud of what they did. But the biggest surprise came during one of my visits to Texas. I was in the warehouse, observing the new operation, when Mark approached me. "Maya," he said, his voice a little hesitant, "I know we've already apologized, but I wanted to thank you again. Not just for saving the company, but for giving us a second chance. You didn't have to do it, and we'll never forget it." Jake joined us. "It's true. We were blind, Maya. We didn't see what was important. And you, quite rightly, could have let us sink. But you didn't. And that means a lot to us." I looked at them, and for the first time, I saw in them not just desperation, but genuine recognition and, perhaps, even respect. That was the true test of my question. They weren't just driven by necessity. They were changing. And I, the humiliated nerd, was there, witnessing the transformation. Texas Logistics Solutions, now under Nexus AI's strategic direction, wasn't just recovering. It was thriving. In 6 months, the company went from red to consistently profitable. The operational efficiency our A system provided was something the market had never seen from a mid-sized company. Larger competitors began to observe us. Curious about the miracle happening in Texas, I made regular visits to Texas Logistics, not just to supervise, but to see the transformation firsthand. And what I saw was remarkable. The work environment had drastically changed. The team, once disheartened and worried about layoffs, was now motivated and proud. They saw the direct impact of technology on their jobs, and morale was soaring. Jake and Mark were the biggest advocates of the new era. They had embraced technology surprisingly, quickly learning to use the new dashboards, interpret data, and make decisions based on our eye insights. They were no longer just managers. They were leaders of a new generation, adaptable and resilient. Weekly meetings, once tense and filled with negative numbers, were now about growth strategies and expansion. We started discussing the possibility of opening new distribution centers, expanding our fleet, and entering new markets. Texas Logistics Solutions was becoming a success story, an example of the power of artificial intelligence when applied correctly. Still, the question, have they truly changed deep down, or is necessity the only thing driving them, persisted, though weaker. I saw them interacting with the team, with clients, and there was a genuine change in their demeanor. They were more humble, more approachable, and showed a gratitude that went beyond the professional. One day, during one of these visits, Jake invited me to lunch at a small local restaurant, a place I used to frequent with my parents when I was a kid. It was a simple yet significant gesture. During lunch, he started talking about the past, something he rarely did. "You know, Maya," he said, looking at his plate, "I used to think that being the strongest, the most popular, was everything. That humiliating others would make me feel better. But I was so wrong. That brought me nothing but emptiness. And when the company started to sink, I realized how weak I truly was." Mark, who was sitting with us, nodded. "We thought we knew everything, that we owned the place. But life taught us a lesson. And you, Maya, you gave us a chance to learn from it." They weren't apologizing again. They were sharing a reflection, a confession of their own failures and regrets. It was a moment of vulnerability I never imagined witnessing from them. I listened without judgment, just absorbing their words. "I understand," I said, finally. "People change, and circumstances can force us to see things from a new perspective." Jake looked me in the eyes. "You didn't just save our company, Maya. You saved us. You gave us a chance to be better people. And for that, we'll be eternally grateful." At that moment, the answer to my internal question became clear. Necessity brought them to me. Yes. But the experience of almost losing everything, of having to swallow their pride and ask for help from the person they hurt the most, had, in fact, transformed them. They were not the same. And I, the humiliated nerd, was there, not just as the CEO who saved them, but as the witness to their redemption. My visit to my hometown for the tech event was a turning point. Not just for me, but for people's perception of Maya. The news of my success and the partnership with Texas Logistics Solutions spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the nerd everyone ignored or humiliated was the most talked about person in town. I received emails from former teachers, schoolmates, and even parents of students who once laughed at me. Some were sincere congratulatory messages. Others were filled with thinly veiled embarrassment. I replied to some, maintaining politeness, but without going into detail. I wasn't seeking their validation, but it was undeniable that the situation was, at the very least, ironic. Texas Logistics Solutions continued to grow exponentially. With Nexus AI's efficiency, they began expanding into neighboring states, and the company's name became synonymous with innovation in the transportation sector. Jake and Mark, who were once on the verge of bankruptcy, were now respected figures in the local business community, often invited to give talks and interviews about how they had turned the game around. They never stopped giving me credit. In every interview, in every public appearance, they mentioned Nexus AI and my vision as the key to their success. It was a recognition that went beyond the professional. It was a testament to their own change and the humility they had acquired. My internal question about the sincerity of their change was answered daily by their actions. My life in Silicon Valley remained hectic. Nexus AI was in a phase of global expansion, and I was constantly traveling to close new deals and oversee projects on different continents. I was at the peak of my career, living a life that was the polar opposite of my past. But destiny, as always, had one more card up its sleeve. One day I received an email from a lawyer. It was a contact request from Sarah, the former queen of gossip and manipulation. My heart froze. Of all people, she was the last one I expected to hear from. The message was formal, but the tone was urgent. She was facing significant legal and financial problems and, somehow, had discovered that I might be the only person able to help her. The irony was almost unbearable. The person who tormented me the most, who orchestrated the prom incident, was now looking for me. Though I hesitated. Why would she seek me out? What could she want? The anger, which I thought I had overcome, began to bubble up. But at the same time, the curiosity was overwhelming. I had faced Jake and Mark, and they had shown remorse. But Sarah, she was a different kind of cruel. I spoke with my assistant, Sarah, the good Sarah, of course, and asked her to investigate the other Sarah's situation. The reports she brought me were shocking. Sarah's life, the former school queen's, had crumbled. The marriage to the rich guy had ended in a contentious divorce. She had lost most of her fortune and was involved in a series of lawsuits for business mismanagement and fraud. She was bankrupt and desperate. This was the climax of my personal story. Jake and Mark had redeemed themselves in a way. But Sarah? I wasn't sure if she was capable of such a thing. And the question that haunted me was, to what extent can necessity drive a person to humble themselves to survive? And is her remorse genuine or just a facade for survival? The answer to that question would be the final revelation, the true outcome of my journey. Sarah's contact request left me in a dilemma. The old anger still burned, but curiosity and the need to understand the extent of her downfall was stronger. I instructed my assistant to schedule a virtual meeting. I didn't want her to set foot in my company, nor did I want her to know where I lived. The distance would give me a layer of protection. On the day of the meeting, I sat in front of the screen, my heart beating a little faster than usual. Sarah's image appeared. She was unrecognizable. There was no longer the gleam of superiority in her eyes, nor the arrogant smile. She looked exhausted, with deep dark circles under her eyes and disheveled hair. The dress she was wearing looked expensive, but it was wrinkled, as if it had been pulled from a suitcase days ago. "Maya," she began, her voice faint, almost a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me. I know you don't owe me anything." I watched her in silence for a moment. The change in her was as drastic as in Jake and Mark, but in a much darker way. They had found humility through work and redemption. She through ruin. "What do you need, Sarah?" I asked, my voice neutral, without any warmth. She took a deep breath, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "I'm in trouble, Maya. Big trouble. My ex-husband left me with nothing, and I'm being sued for fraud in one of my old businesses. I've lost everything. My house, my savings. I have nowhere to go." She paused, and tears began to stream down her face. "I know this sounds crazy, but I heard about what you did for Texas Logistics, and I know you're the only person who can. Help me. I need a lawyer, money to pay off debts, ... I need a chance." I stared at her. The question that haunted me, to what extent can necessity drive a person to humble themselves to survive? And is her remorse genuine or just a facade for survival? Was right there, in front of me, waiting for an answer. "Sarah," I said, my voice still controlled, "do you remember the junior prom? The molasses and feathers? How you and your friends humiliated me in front of the whole school?" She flinched, and more tears fell. "I remember, Maya. I remember everything, and I hate myself for it. I was a horrible person. I was jealous, cruel. I made you suffer in a way no one should suffer. And I have no excuse, none." The sincerity in her voice was shocking. There wasn't a hint of her old arrogance, just deep pain and regret that seemed genuine. She wasn't trying to justify herself. She was stripping away any remaining pride. "I know you have every right to hate me," she continued, her voice choked. "To let me sink. I deserve it. But I'm begging you, Maya. Please. I have no one else." I watched her. The image of the school queen, so powerful and cruel, had been replaced by a broken woman, begging for help. The tables had completely turned, in a way I never imagined. It was her humiliation, and the power was mine. But what would I do with it? The silence in the video call was heavy, filled only by the sound of Sarah's breathing and my own heartbeat. Her image, so broken and desperate, was a stark contrast to the Sarah I knew from school. The queen who once reigned with cruelty was now reduced to nothing, begging for my help. The old anger was still there, a knot in my stomach. I could simply hang up the call, ignore her plea, and watch her sink. It would be what many would consider poetic justice, but something held me back. It wasn't compassion. Not exactly. It was a mix of curiosity about what she would do if I helped her, and the need to understand if her remorse was genuine or just a facade for survival. I took a deep breath, processing everything. Jake and Mark's story taught me that people can change, that despair can be a catalyst for humility. But Sarah was different. Her cruelty was more calculated, more personal. "Sarah," I finally said, my voice still cold, but with a hint of something I couldn't even identify. "I'm not going to give you money. And Nexus A is not going to hire you." Her face fell, and I could see hope draining from her eyes. "But—" "Maya, please ... I interrupted her. "However, I am willing to give you a chance. Not a chance for easy money, but a chance to rebuild your life, if you're willing to work for it. I have contacts in Silicon Valley, people who can help you find an entry-level job, perhaps as an administrative assistant in a smaller startup. It will be a modest salary, and you'll have to start from scratch. No luxuries, no perks. And you'll have to prove yourself every day." She looked at me, incredulous. "A job? But ... what about my lawsuits? My debts?" "I'll refer you to a pro bono lawyer who can help you with the lawsuits, but you'll have to do your part. And your debts, you'll have to pay them off over time, with your own work. There are no shortcuts, Sarah. Not for you." I watched her closely. The question, to what extent can necessity drive a person to humble themselves to survive? And is her remorse genuine or just a facade for survival? Was about to be answered. She hesitated for a long moment. The image of the old Sarah, the arrogant queen, seemed to fight with the broken woman in front of me. Finally, she nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I accept, Maya," she said, her voice choked. "Anything. I just need a chance. And I promise I'll prove I've changed. I swear." I kept my expression neutral. "Send your resume to my assistant. She make the contacts. But understand, Sarah, this is your only chance. If you fail, if you try anything dishonest, I won't hesitate to expose you. And you'll be on your own." She nodded again, her head bowed. "I understand. Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much." I ended the call. I felt a deep sigh escape my lips. The decision had been made. It wasn't about revenge, nor about complete forgiveness. It was about giving a chance, but with clear terms, and seeing if necessity could, in fact, lead to genuine change in someone as profoundly cruel as Sarah. The final answer to that question, the true revelation, only time would tell. After hanging up the call with Sarah, I felt a strange relief. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge, but the feeling that I had done what was right, or at least what I believed to be the most challenging and, perhaps, most transformative path for her. I had given her a rope, but it was up to her to decide if she would use it to climb or to hang herself. My assistant, the good Sarah, acted quickly. She made the necessary contacts, and Sarah got a job as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized tech startup in Silicon Valley. It was an entry-level position, with a salary that barely covered the basics in expensive California. For someone who was used to luxuries and a life of ostentation, it would be a brutal reality check. I didn't seek her out, but I asked my assistant to keep me discreetly informed. I wanted to know if she was truly willing to pay the price of her redemption. The initial reports were not surprising. Sarah was struggling. She lived in a small, expensive apartment, far from the glitz and glamour she once enjoyed. The work was arduous and thankless, and she didn't have the experience or skills that most young talents in Silicon Valley possessed. She complained, of course. My assistant passed on the whispers that reached her. "This isn't for me. I deserve more. People here are so strange." It was the old Sarah fighting to hold on, the arrogance and sense of entitlement still present, but suffocated by necessity. However, as the weeks passed, something began to change. My assistant's reports began to include different details. Sarah was arriving early for work, staying late. She was asking colleagues for help, something the old Sarah would never do. She was slowly learning the tools and processes. She wasn't shining, but she was persisting. The pro bono lawyer I referred her to was doing solid work with her lawsuits, but the road was long and required a lot of documentation and depositions. Sarah was attending all meetings, submitting the necessary documents and facing the reality of her financial failures. It was a humiliating process for her, but she was moving forward. I found myself thinking about her more often. The question, to what extent can necessity drive a person to humble themselves to survive? And is her remorse genuine or just a facade for survival? Still didn't have a clear answer. Necessity was undoubtedly the initial driver, but the persistence, the willingness to endure humiliation and hard work, suggested that perhaps there was a seed of genuine change sprouting. Jake and Mark, on the other hand, were in full ascent. Texas Logistics Solutions was now a major player in the market, and they were reaping the rewards of their own transformation. They called me to thank me, to share new achievements, and to reaffirm their gratitude. Their redemption was visible, palpable, but Sarah, her journey was more complex, more uncertain. She was on a path of penance, paying the price for her past actions, not with money, but with sweat and humility. And I, the Maya who was once the target of her cruelty, was the only one who knew the extent of her struggle and the uncertainty of her future. The end of this story, the true answer about Sarah, was yet to be revealed. Months turned into a year. Texas Logistics Solutions was soaring, and Jake and Mark were examples of success and redemption. They had become reliable business partners, and somehow even friends. It was an unlikely friendship, built on the ashes of a painful past, but it was real. And Sarah? The question that had haunted me for so long finally began to have a definitive answer. My assistant's reports about her were increasingly positive. She no longer complained. She was learning new skills, taking on more responsibilities. In her administrative assistant job, she was becoming competent and even proactive. The pro bono lawyer I had referred to had secured a favorable settlement in her lawsuits, and she was diligently paying off her debts with her modest salary. One day I received an email from her. It wasn't a plea for help, nor a complaint. It was an invitation. She was inviting me to a small event at the startup where she worked. They were launching a new product, and she, as part of the administrative support team, was helping with the organization. I hesitated for a moment. It was the first time she had invited me to something, not out of desperation. I decided to go. The event was simple but well organized. Sarah was there, smiling, interacting with people. She looked different. She was no longer the broken woman I had seen on the video call, nor the arrogant queen from school. She looked at peace. She saw me and came over. "Maya, so glad you came." "You look different, Sarah," I said, honestly. She smiled, a genuine smile. "I am. I had to lose everything to finally find myself, to understand what truly matters. And I owe that to you." She paused, and her eyes filled with tears. "I know a thank you will never be enough for what you did for me. You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. You taught me that true strength isn't in stepping on others, but in rising after you fall. And I'm so sorry for everything I did to you, Maya. I truly am. At that moment, the answer to my final question revealed itself, and it was the most surprising of all. It wasn't just necessity that had driven her. Necessity brought her to my door, yes, but the humiliation of having to rebuild her life from scratch, of having to face her own demons, had, in fact, transformed her. Her remorse was genuine. She was no longer begging for forgiveness out of convenience, but for a redemption she had earned through her own effort. She had humbled herself, yes, but not to deceive me, but to rebuild herself. I looked at her, and for the first time in years I felt something beyond anger or curiosity. I felt a pang of pride. She had learned her lesson, and was becoming a better person. I see that, Sarah, I said, and for the first time my smile was genuine. I see the change. The story of Maya, the humiliated girl who became a successful CEO, and who saw her tormentors beg for forgiveness, had an ending I never imagined. It wasn't an overwhelming revenge, but a journey of transformation, for me and for those who once made me cry. And the greatest victory wasn't my success, but the ability to see redemption, even in the hearts that were once the cruelest. If you enjoyed this story of twists and overcoming, don't forget to subscribe to the Silent Confessionals channel for more incredible stories like this. Feel free to comment on what you liked most about Maya's story.